Hello, I am Cody Allingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. This show is brought to you by Swarbricks, the first law firm in New Zealand to accept Bitcoin for legal services. The team at Swarbricks are Bitcoiners, and they are knowledgeable about the legal aspects of Bitcoin in New Zealand in areas like estate planning, property, and trusts. Swarbricks offers a 20% discount for services paid in Bitcoin. Find out more at swarbricks.co.nz/Bitcoin. Now, today I talk with Paul from Bitkiwi, who are organising New Zealand's premier Bitcoin meetup events. We talk about focusing on proof of work in your personal life, unplugging from the utter distraction of legacy media, and really asking fundamental questions about the future state of government and society. As the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." There is nothing permanent except change. What does this mean for us? How does Bitcoin play a role in this new world? I do hope you enjoy this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, please send an email to hello@thetransformationofvalue.com and I will get back to you. Otherwise, on to the show. And we are live, but as always, we talk shit before we actually start the episode, just to get all the bad vibes out of the room. It's part of my feng shui procedure. In work mode, you have been too, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, Conrad's big on the feng shui thing, eh? He talks about it a bit.
Oh yeah.
Oh, wait, is that what it? Yeah, feng shui.
Feng shui.
Feng shui.
Feng shui. Yeah, I don't know how to say it, but I think it means wind, water. Feng is wind and shui is water in Chinese. So sort of the elements and the flow of a place.
Is there actually like a maths to it, or is it really just a feel?
I think it's a feel. It's I'm not an expert, but there's sort of kind of spiritual elements to it. Sort of, the way a room is laid out, the direction of the room. It's actually, I think, been used to plan cities as well. Really? As an urban methodology, yeah. I think like the ancient capitals of China, and even I think Kyoto, like the ancient capital of Japan, had feng shui in its kind of layout and direction and orientation and stuff.
Interesting.
Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, man, how you been?
Yeah, good. Yep, getting through it.
Yeah.
Getting through life, putting in the proof of work.
Yeah. I was talking to someone about this recently, just how profound the idea of proof of work is as an operating modus operandi for just your career, your work, your family, everything. It's pretty solid.
It's great. I love it. Yeah, there's a lot to it. It really, you can keep expanding on it. It seems like a simple concept, but actually you can see it filter through in so many aspects of life. I've told the story before, but I said there was a work, like away day thing, and a team sort of building, and they went around the circle and asked everyone to name something in their life that was important to them and explain why. And when it was my turn, I said the concept of proof of work, and I explained it and then gave a few examples based on what the people who had been before me had said, and why what they had said had an element of proof of work to it. And people found it really interesting. We ended up talking ages about it. People found it was quite an interesting concept, and we talked about it a lot, and it was really great. And I never mentioned Bitcoin once. I just introduced them to the proof of work concept, and it was almost by stealth. I was introducing them to a Bitcoin principle, which was great.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting, man. Like, in a funny way, I've been heads down working on the podcast and a few other projects, but sort of it's become quite normalized now, just getting stuff done and working away on projects. And I don't know, I sort of almost don't have anything to say about it. It just is,
Well, what I was explaining to them that day was that a few people who went before me named objects that meant a lot to them, and there was a connection where every object had huge proof of work in behind it. And so I was explaining the idea that something is vastly more important to you if proof of work has gone into it, rather than you were just given or gifted something. Or even if you were gifted something that had a huge amount of proof of work behind it, a lot of the value you place in it, whether you're conscious of it or not, was the work that went into either creating or preserving or increasing the value of that particular thing. And it's actually a natural thing, you know, like there's no, people talk about that phenomenon where people who win lotto and it's all gone within a year, those sort of ideals. And it's a hugely massive percentage of people that win lotteries. The money is frittered away very quickly. And I feel like there was no work for it. I feel like if they'd worked for that money or got it through something important in their lives, there would be more of a desire to spend it wisely or get more value out of it than just, yay, this windfall that I got for a $2 lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lotto tickets are a lot more than $2 now, though, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
Can you still get scratches? Are they still a thing?
Yeah, you can. I think they still even have like $1 or $2 ones. I haven't bought one for many years.
So I have a bit of a just this deep fascination with Lotto as a system, as a belief system. Like, I just don't understand how people can partake in that, you know? Like,
yeah, same. I never quite got that.
I never understood. And in a funny way, I mean, Bitcoin mining's a bit like that, though. Like, you know, are you going to get a block or not? You know, you got to be in to win.
Yeah, there's an irony there, isn't there? You're putting in the work by applying the energy to it. Well, you may not get anything.
The other day, Brains Pool got two blocks in a row, which I thought was pretty amazing. Because usually it's only a couple a day that they get. And then the following day, you know, it's just running, you know, hours, 12, 16 hours, and there was nothing. And it's sort of, I mean, you can understand the kind of the chance element of it. Yeah. But you never know at what point, what if I just turned it off, you know, for a little bit? Yeah. You know, that one moment where the two blocks side by side.
I guess you just have to wait out that long-term law of averages, eh? Yeah. Maybe it's better not to check every day.
Yeah. I mean, it's over the long enough time span, it evens out to be pretty much proportionate to the percentage of the hash rate that the pool has. But in the short term, you know, you get really good days, you get bad days. And I mean, what I've learned is you just need to be on 24/7. You know, you can't time it. But it is interesting with Brains. You see a huge dip, which I imagine is probably Northern Hemisphere daytime, when a lot of miners go offline. So I imagine a lot of them come back online in the evening when they've got lower rates. And it's summertime at the moment. And so it is quite a noticeable difference. Like if you look at the total, you know, active miners in the pool.
So does that mean they get more blocks in the American night time when they've got more hash power getting thrown at it?
Well, actually, I don't know what it looks like, though, if you were to look at the total number of miners, you know, and the total hash rate. I'm not sure what that is, but in terms of Brains' hash rate, it definitely dips down at a certain point, which kind of is quite convenient because it's, you know, we're the opposite here. So, you know, I'm just running through, you know, all the way through. But yeah, whether there is a global change sort of hour by hour sort of or throughout the day, I haven't actually looked into that, but it would be interesting to see.
There's a whole world of analysis in there, eh? I've not really got into it that much, but I'm not a
numbers person, as you know, so I can appreciate that they are important and I can look into some of it, but some of the more abstract correlations are just quite, I don't know, they're quite challenging, you know, sort of.
Thankfully, you can apply simple principles, similar to just not worrying about the Bitcoin price and just stacking it and putting it in your cold storage in the same way. You can apply a simple principle. You know what, I got a miner, I don't want to get into all this analysis, I'm just going to leave it on and I'm going to come out with the law of averages.
Yeah, well, you just take the variable out of it. You know, if you've got the miner going, it's like that, you've just removed that variable from the equation. It's not relevant anymore. The only things you can actually control are, you know, the hardware that you've, you know, the way what you've got set up. You know, have you got it, you know, cooling efficiently? Have you got a good setup for the hardware? And then have you got good power rates? Those are really, I think those are really the only variables that matter. You know, to the individual. And there's a few other things, maybe choosing a good pool, you know, making sure you've got things optimized, but the global trend, it doesn't really matter. Like the difficulty will continue to go up.
The thing that I find quite interesting is because Bitcoin is still such a new thing, and is changing so fast all the time. Is like seeing some of the discussion in the group around new things that have come out and new things people are trying. Like I saw them pictures of this 4-fan system and all these cool things that just pop up. Like people are just innovating and things are moving so fast all the time. If you switch off for a couple of weeks and come back, there'll be something new that people are just picking up on and finding, and it's moving quite fast. I love that innovative side of Bitcoin where people are just always plugging away at stuff.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's interesting. It feels like it's plateauing, but really what it's doing is kind of consolidating, and then there'll be all of this stuff get announced, and it's especially sort of in this, I don't know, kind of bear market or whatever you want to call it, but it's sort of like, suddenly there'll be one day and just all of this stuff gets announced, and it doesn't even make any sort of news because no one's really paying that much attention to it except for us. Like, I don't know, people don't realize like there's a lot of foundational growth happening that isn't visible on the surface, but it's really strengthening the overall use case, and a lot of things that are just taking time. A lot of the ETF stuff and all of that thing, for better or for worse, is just making its way through the system. And when it finally happens with BlackRock or whatever, and whatever you may think about that, like that will happen and that will be a thing, and one day it will just come online, and then suddenly you've got institutional investment in Bitcoin at a large scale via
I've seen a lot of people claiming that's exactly what's happening right now. I saw a great tweet about the game theory means that they have to be stacking in silence right now to try and get ahead of the game, and there was something like some crazy number of the number of Bitcoin that's been withdrawn from the exchanges in the last month or 3 months, and then a lot of the activity, there's a lot of speculation, but I mean, I guess I've seen all that before and it hasn't come to much, but some of it's fairly compelling, some of the facts they cite.
Do you follow much macro economic political stuff?
Not really. Well, I guess I do without intending to, just because my feed is filled with so much of it. It just invades the Bitcoin space a bit. And I mean, to take notice of the local economy, it's directly impacting me. I mean, I've got a curiosity about it, but I'm no expert, don't know a lot of it, what it all means. Yeah,
I don't know. I've certainly taken a step back from kind of following it closely. I mean, it's sort of like, like when's the recession really going to come? That's sort of the big question, right? And I don't know. You can talk about it, and it gets quite technical, I think. There's some very deep, financial, the stuff about bonds and all of that, and it is beyond me. And so I think, well, okay, there's murmurings and there's things happening in this space, and it's continuing to be a topic. But there's not really much that it's a bit like the mining. There's nothing I can do about it. Whether the hash rate goes up or down globally, it doesn't matter to me. I just need to keep my machine on. Whatever happens, whether it's a recession or we have a big war or whatever, it really doesn't matter. I just need to make sure I've got my situation sorted here, and I can't influence that stuff.
Yeah, I think I learnt that lesson a little bit in 2008 and 2009 because when all that sort of kicked off, and it's the first time in my life as an adult that I was seeing these things go on, and put a lot of thought into it, and I was doing a lot of research and stressing about my own situation and job security, and started planning for this and for that, and before I knew it, everything had just kind of happened around me, and it didn't actually impact me really at the time. And so I thought, oh God, I feel like I wasted a lot of time on this when it was just kind of going to travel, and I should have focused more on my own life and what I was doing and where I was going, instead of feeling like the world was going on pause and I need to make sure I'm going to be okay. I mean, that is important, but yeah, my hindsight was, geez, I wish I just carried on a little bit. So there's definitely an element of that now with me. Having said that, I mean, I know they come up with these technical definitions and there's all this media spin and everything, but I mean, to me, I assume that we're in a recession right now. I mean, just on the ground evidence around me, like costs of, well, I don't know about the term recession, and again, I'm not an expert, but it feels like the economy is just in a massive problematic hole. Just the constant evidence of businesses just shutting all over the place and not many new ones starting at all. the cost of living is, it's insane. And then, you see all these things from overseas. A lot of them I don't understand, but when you're seeing headlines of Evergrande or whatever losing 90% of their stock value in a day, and again, like all this stuff about bonds and some of this, I don't understand all these things very well, but Japan and this yield curve control, and you see all these things and the explanations I read of them, and I think, man, these are like red flags all over the place in the world economy. But then we're in a different position than when we were 15 years ago in terms of the information we're fed. So it feels like the PR machine of government and even just large organisations is just an overdrive compared to 15 years ago. And so you don't really know what to believe half the time. And so I do often just resort to my own eyes and ears and what I can see right in front of my face happening around me. Like I used to get lunch regularly at 2 different places in Wellington and both shut. We're organising our next Bitkiwi event, and the company that owns the venue isn't gone into liquidation. So we're having to organise a bit of a backup plan. I was even quite surprised, like Wishbone went under. You see those places everywhere. I mean, to be honest, I never really understood the business model that much, but who was buying these $50 sandwiches?
Well, it's funny, they used to have one up at the university, and when I was there, and even back then, it was like a $15 sandwich, and I was like, man, who's going to pay for this?
I never got this, yeah.
And they were losing, they lost market dominance to the Hare Krishnas, which were like $5 vegan cult meals, but I never got it.
Yeah, I made a joke to a mate. I was like, what? Wishbone's closing? What am I going to do when I'm in the airport and I'm absolutely desperate for anything to eat now? So I was thinking, is that the only place this place was making money? But anyway, I joke. But yeah, there's just, like I saw, Epic Pale Ale used to be my favourite beer about 10 years ago. So they've gone into liquidation, or they've been bought now, I think, by someone. But there's just constant evidence. I mean, my kids are like, can we go to KFC? And I'm like, okay, shut. I'm like, what the hell? And I Google, and they've changed their hours, 12 p.m. to 8 p.m, 7 days a week up in my area. I'm like, man, that's crazy. I worked there as an 18-year-old. In the late 90s, it was 10 or 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. every night. And now they've just limited their hours, and it's all staffing. Like my local chemist used to shut at 6:30 every night. Now it shuts at 5:30 for staff because of staffing levels. Like, this stuff is just all over the place everywhere. I don't know if you've been in many shops lately, but the service is awful almost everywhere now. And they're just understaffed, and the staff don't seem to care. I feel there's a general malaise. There's a lack of productivity and innovation going on. It just feels like a proper recession.
It feels like a recession, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you mention that. So there's a couple of things. One, I think our experience at the surface level of retail, shopping, kind of consumer stuff, I think for many people that's the yardstick that they judge things by, because that's all they know. And I think in a way it's almost the wrong way to look at it, because the consumer experience is such a small part of the economy, really. Obviously food and things like that, it's an essential, but that's not the money. The money is the big funds and the big movements of capital, big investment, credit and investment opportunities. These kinds of things are where the real kind of engine of the economy is. And so paying more for a coffee, or paying more in the supermarket, is so far down and so disconnected from the actual kind of the money printing and all of that stuff, that it's kind of like we're looking at a symptom and we're trying to guess the sickness. We're kind of working backwards, or for most people, and they think, things have gone up, or they might conversely say things maybe haven't gone up as much as I expected. Maybe inflation's under control, but what they're not seeing is this asteroid that's on its way and it's about to hit, which is the bigger infrastructure challenges, the bigger movements of capital, the liquidity of the nation state, these kinds of questions, which are a bit more existential. But unless you actually understand stuff like the bond yield curve control in Japan, which I don't, I certainly don't understand it, but there's people who I listen to, who I trust, who seem to think that this is going to be cataclysmic. There's no way out of it. I don't know if you've sort of seen some of that commentary, but what does a normal person, and what do I know about bonds? And so we're kind of looking, the asteroids coming, and we're sort of looking at the things down here near our feet. And so this comes back to principles. So I got an episode coming out with Darcy, NZ Everyday Investor. I don't know if it will come out before or after our episode really goes live, but I was talking to him about sort of my principles and how I think this the stationary nature of a lot of people, and sort of people being bound to something like a house or a career in a location such as New Zealand, that's actually probably the biggest liability, because when things do get tough, you're really going to be reluctant to up and go. And I consider the ability in this kind of frothy environment to be able to leave and go and kind of pick up work overseas and do that sort of thing as a real valuable skill set and that kind of dynamism. But like what you said about 2008, like honestly, you could worry about it all day long, but the best thing you could have done is probably, or the best thing to do in a situation like that is just to put your head down and work hard and be ready to handle whatever happens. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, that's a luxury I sadly don't have with kids, but it's definitely being able to be nimble like that, I think, is a huge benefit to surviving or getting through an economic shock well. So that's and like you've recently read The Sovereign Individual as well, and you look at that as potential roadmap for the future, which would be great, where you've got actual locations and their local administration. And I want to say administration because I see it more as administration than governance. But the local administration is trying to lure you to their area for your productivity and your to add you to their economy and compete for you. And I see that as a great future where you've got the right incentives rather than trying to trap you there.
Yeah, well, I think I had so I caught up with Darcy, and so he interviewed me because the last time we did it, I was interviewing him. But it's interesting because I have just read through The Sovereign Individual, and a lot of those ideas I had already seeded from different things, and I'd already been thinking about, and I came across this idea that I think we're seeing the end of the nation state, and the ability to be nimble in that environment. And as you say, you got kids, you got commitments here, but there's still a degree of flexibility and nimbleness that you can still bring to that. I think what the opposite of that is where you're stuck in the old ideology and the old way of doing things, and you're reluctant to let go of it. And I think that's sort of becoming more and more clear to me now that like the old world is gone, and it died with COVID, and that's not going to come back no matter how much we long for it. And there will be massive failures of economies. There will be challenges. There will be periods of sort of stability that are followed by periods of instability, but generally it will be a decline and a descendancy. And the way I think of it, it's like, you get as much Bitcoin as possible, have the ability to go and do what you need to do, no matter where you're domiciled. Don't be reliant on the income, your income being just from one country, and kind of, you may exist here in New Zealand and physically be here, but if your economic life is dependent on New Zealand, I think that's a risk, because with what they're doing, destroying the rural sector, with some of the policies and stuff that are coming out, and who knows, I don't even care anymore, but it's just like, I don't know, I wouldn't want to be relying on the New Zealand dollar in any capacity.
I think about it a little bit more positively. I feel that
yeah, it's pretty dark, right?
and again, listen to me talking to you before, you probably sigh about talking about the internet and Bitcoin together all the time, but the internet was a great sort of freedom enabler for a lot of places in the world, and a lot of people. Suddenly they could communicate or create things or do things using that protocol they previously hadn't been able to. And so I see Bitcoin in the same way, that we might get, when you use the word decline, I feel like in a positive light, the role of government might decline, which is a positive thing for me. And it actually could be like, a form of an enlightenment as we discover Bitcoin and move into those things, and we establish really good an incentive structure that works, that we don't have to fight against. And I think we could see a huge blossoming and great development, and I don't think it necessarily has to be a huge implosion. Like it doesn't have to be a phoenix rising from the ashes. I think it can be a positive transition where things tick up. I really loved, in fact, your podcast with James Vigiano, because he talked about some concepts that I hadn't crossed my mind before around the adoption of Bitcoin that made me feel incredibly positive about how it could go. I really loved that discussion, because his view on it and the logic he applied to it, I really believed it. I was like, man, he's mapping out a way forward that seems really logical and feasible, and it could be really positive without the need for some kind of disastrous collapse anywhere. I really enjoyed that discussion, and it made me feel really positive and excited about the future with Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, I think as you know, with me, I have these kind of big picture ideas, and I think I'm able to entertain multiple realities of what could be simultaneously. And I think recently there's been a couple of people I've spoken with, James Vigiano, Jason Mayer as well, with the Progressives case for Bitcoin, and a few other people who certainly give the sort of more towards what you're talking about, this kind of, this peaceful revolution in the way of the internet, and it just sort of happens and it works and everything falls into place. But then I've just been reading 1984 again, and I got I don't know if you can see it, I got a little message up on my wall there: I am a thought criminal. As I think about just what could be, and the ability of the state and the powers to be to want to hold on. And that's when I go on that direction. I think, well, they're not going to let go, because it's not about money and it's not about wealth, it's about power. And so, you corner that animal, it's going to fight back. And I sort of flip between those two sort of realities. And where's the crossover between them when you enter into a weird time?
The cool thing, though, about Bitcoin is it is so focused on the individual, and sets incentives which bring about positives for the collective without you having to necessarily work as a collective or be on the same page. The incentives are at an individual level, and then they bring great prosperity, I feel, for the group as a collective as well. And so the thing I feel good about with Bitcoin coming in and that kind of thought is the incentives are so aligned that the powers that be that don't want to give up the power, the incentives for Bitcoin are there for them too. And that's where I think I'm not too worried about that, because they'll flip. I mean, like you mentioned BlackRock before, we can see what's going on there. They want an ETF. I mean, they own a shareholding in 4 of the largest 5 mining companies in the world. I mean, they're in on Bitcoin. You hear what Larry Fink says.
Yeah.
And they are one of these power structures we're talking about. They've got a huge influence with governments. They're a massive. Are they the largest holder of what, steward of capital? I don't even know what you call it. They've just got cozy with our government. Not a big deal. And so they're the epitome of the system we're talking about, to me.
That's a good point. And they're
in on Bitcoin. Yeah. And they might try these kind of fiat games, price manipulation. They'll try and corner this market. They try and get as close to a monopoly as they can try and be. They'll try all these things because that's the modus operandi. But the incentives for Bitcoin remain. The game theory is there. The transparency and the public ownership of this being a public commodity is there, and they can't break that. Like, I feel fairly positive that the big fight back will come from your Elizabeth Warrens and this fella on the OC or whatever that activist who wrote the book recently, who really makes me laugh. I feel like they'll be filtered down to individuals, and actually there won't be many large organizations who are coming out as a group against Bitcoin, because secretly they're all individuals. They're all got the same incentives, and that game theory is going to come for them too.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I guess, again, I balance it with O'Brien in the room, asking how many fingers he's holding up. 2 + 2 is 5, and I want to believe that. I want to believe that the maths doesn't add up. That's where these people exist. The power corrupts the mind, and I don't know. Despite that, I mean, the BlackRock thing you mentioned. I mean, that is a really good point. But in the midterm, what does that look like? I don't know. If you suddenly take it away from people, take it away from something like the government, the ability to print money, the ability to control the economy centrally, which they've taken as a God-given right, handed down to them. And so in discussions, we talk about the Reserve Bank, we talk about, the New Zealand government, and I don't know, this is kind of the hubris of it all. Makes me think it's going to be a reality, a wake-up call for them when the time comes. And I guess that what we can maybe think about as well is that they're not going to see it coming either, and by the time they do, it's going to be too late.
Well, that's the kind of sad thing for me is, they'll try all these things and eventually fail, and we'll all end up in the same place with Bitcoin. And God, I just hope they don't cause too much pain trying to fight it, And I know it's hard to be hard in those kind of realms to accept Bitcoin and then bravely convince your peers and these governments and large organizations and that this is the way to go. That's a really brave step that I can't see a lot of them making. But oh God, I just hope they don't cause too much damage fighting. Honestly,
again, we're naive in New Zealand, but you look at the Cultural Revolution in China, you look at the killing fields in Cambodia. I mean, the ability of the government to do the absolute worst thing for the people is pretty strong. And what is it? A corrupt leader would rather see the country burn than to let go of power. And I think, whether or not we're in that here in New Zealand is debatable. But I think certainly in a lot of the world, they'd rather let it all burn to the ground and instead of giving up. And I think that's sort of that's the challenge, and so it almost needs to swap in and swap out relatively quickly and seamlessly. If it becomes a protracted political thing and people start trenching in and you get this sort of stalemate and this fight and this kind of attack. It's sort of Corey's, what was it, the fight to win the war, or the fight to avoid the war, Corey Clippenston. I don't know. It's just sort of stuff that I've been thinking about lately.
There's an interesting thing happening. I'm no expert, I haven't followed it that closely, but watching what's going on and the whole BRICS making this active play to move away from the US dollar, I found that I've been quite curious about that, because what's going on there is what I once upon a time thought we'd see, the adoption of Bitcoin. So I feel like we're getting a little favour here from these world powers, where we're actually seeing what it might look like when large influential countries move away from the world's reserve currency. So it's going to be very interesting how that plays out, because it seems a very hard push. There's, again, you don't always know what to believe, but you see all these things coming out about, they're transacting oil in other currencies instead of USD. And then BRICS is expanding and they're all getting involved, and there's chat of a gold-backed currency and all sorts of stuff. And Bitcoin's out of the conversation in that. So it's almost like we're getting this little preview of what happens in the world and how the powers that be will struggle to retain their power when others are trying to move away from it. So I'm quite curious to watch how that situation plays out, because it'll be interesting how the US reacts to all of that.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's Yeah, again, I live in two worlds. One is it's all good, and the other is it's all going to shit. And I don't know. It's kind of fun though to see the crossover between them, and I can only imagine how challenging it would be if you only knew the negative one, and I think that's pretty standard right now.
Yeah, that frightens me. I have a friend who just gets really deep in all that stuff, and I don't see him that often, but when I do, have you seen this? And have you seen, oh mate, everything's going to shit, blah blah blah. And just like, man, I don't know how you live like this. Like you're right. I tend to just shut it out. I'm like, you know what? Heads down in the things I'm interested in, focusing on my immediate life at hand. Getting heavily involved in Bitcoin. I've got my day job and the kids and all these things going on, and there's enough there to occupy the mind. And so I think he's getting sick of me when he does see me, because I keep plugging away and I'm like, how does this impact you today? Like when you go to work today, come home, you've got 2 daughters, you do this, you do that. Like all of these things you're complaining about, American politics and all these kind of things that you say are going on, how is it actually impacting you at a local level? And I'm trying to imply the message to them, man, you're just putting your life on hold to waste time on this. Like, focus on what's going on around you. If one of these political implications that you're so wound up about enters into your local economy and your local life, then yeah, I get it. Address it, challenge it, do what you got to do. But when this is all the politics in another country, God, what are you doing, man?
You know what? I just realized that it's almost the opposite of self-sovereignty, because you're almost you're just watching it happen through your computer screen or your phone.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's an abstraction. And if you just assumed that it's all fake news and none of that stuff's real and actually everything's all good, like, would that change anything? Or if you assume that it's 10 times worse than what they say, would that change anything? Like, because you can't do anything about it. You're just watching it, but you have no sovereignty. You have no agency. You can't change that outcome. The only thing you can change is yourself. And so, in a way, that's sort of like a Stoic philosophy. Just let the machinations of the world do what they will, and you can, doesn't matter, because what does Marcus Aurelius say? Like, soon no one will even remember your name. We all return to dust eventually, and so the best you can do is sort of stay humble and stack sats in the meantime. But it's not. I mean, the corruption of politics and society is eternal. It just so happens that we've got media that's really trained to bring that to your attention now. And in a way, perhaps that's the control mechanism, like keeping people impotent. Because I would argue that a lot of these people who watch the news all the time, and that they've never stood up for anything in their life, probably. Like, if you're so worried about it, go and do something about it.
Yeah, that was a couple of discussions that got heated, but that was one of my lines at the end. Well, what can you do about it? Seriously.
Well, no,
and he's like, don't be facetious, sort of thing. And I'm like, no, this is a serious question. What could you possibly do about it? And if there's something you could do about it, why aren't you doing it?
Well, that's the thing, because I think that can be taken negatively. Like, well, what do you, what can you do about it? Because I
get that.
The kind of, Buddhist kind of, limperist thing, right? It's like, I don't do anything. You can't change anything. It's like, no, actually, fuck you. I'm going to go and do something about it. And so that thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start a business. I'm going to do this. I'm going to upskill myself. I'm going to change the outcome for me and my family, and positively influence the world around me. I can do that. And that's sort of like self-improvement, which is quite a common theme in the Bitcoin world. In a funny way, people talk about how it makes you into a better person. You strive to learn.
Well, I've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
I'm living. It's changed me completely.
Yeah. It's sort of I think that's the real insight. And so maybe this is a renaissance of rediscovery of philosophy, of some form of stoicism combined with pragmatic action. Get shit done, and don't dwell, because if you're not happy with it, because that's the control mechanism. It's just the repeated media, the narration, the narrative, telling you what to think and what to believe. And it's funny that it's like, was it neuro-linguistic programming, the repetition of words or phrases, they get into your brain. I don't know, when was the last time you watched mainstream news, man?
Do you know what? Not for a long time. And God, I couldn't be better for it. Like, and actually it was a real eye-opener because last year we've talked about this at length, but last year I went through a separation, and I went and stayed while I was sorting out the situation and buying my own house. I stayed in an apartment on my parents' property for 4 months until I bought my own place and moved and got things sorted. And they watched the news every night, and it drove me crazy. I go in there and help them cook dinner or whatever, and 6 o'clock the news would come on, and I couldn't help it. I was like, "Oh, you guys still watch the news?" Like, and they're like, "Yeah," like blah blah. And then I'd be doing stuff in their kitchen and that, and it would rack me up. Like, I'd be hearing it, and I'd be like, "Oh, put something else on," you know? Like,
you can't block it out unless
And then I even noticed that they weren't enjoying it. They want to watch every night, and they debate with me thick and thin that they're not going to turn it off. They're going to keep watching it. And yet they're sitting there complaining the whole time. Like, complaining about this, complaining about that. And it was just insane. And I was a little bit sneaky with some attitude. Like, my mum's family are all from the Netherlands. And at the time, there was the big farming protests were happening in the Netherlands, which wasn't on the news. And I knew all about that. I'd seen it down the feed and all that. And so I couldn't help myself. Like, I went in one night to get some dinner, and the news had just finished. And I was like, oh, there was a thing about the Netherlands on, because I knew my mum would be interested in that. She's like, what thing? And I was like, was there nothing about the Netherlands on the news? And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, I've seen a thing today. It's big news in the Netherlands. Huge protests. The motorways are blocked up. The farmers are all... She's like, what? And I was like, yeah, it's like big. And then I just held up my phone and showed her a little clip of something going on. And she was like, oh my God. And then she's onto her computer and she's messaging all her relatives in the Netherlands. She's like, I can't believe what's happening. I can't believe it. She goes, why wasn't that on the news? And I was like, what's what I'm telling you guys, man? It's selective.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, now that I never watch the news, and every now and then maybe something gets linked to me. It's sort of an article or something on mainstream media, and I sort of reluctantly maybe happen to open it up, and I just can straight away. My eyes laser through the bullshit, and I'm like, yeah, what's the narrative here? Like, what? You got this thing, but what are you trying to say? Because it's all messaging now, and it's public relations, and it's
it's just PR, and that's what I don't like about it. Because I think you've said this to me before. When you read the news now, you're not just reading or watching; you're trying to figure out what the news really is. Because you're like, okay, so you get the narrative up front of what the message is that they want you to get, but you're trying to look for the actual fact of what has occurred here. You're not that interested in their opinion or the narrative. You want to come to those conclusions yourself, even if you agree with them. And so you're constantly, when you watch these things, you find yourself, so what is this? Like, what actually happened? Like, it's almost like a searching exercise now when you want to find out about current events, trying to figure out the truth.
Well, that's the thing, and I think New Zealand is still, and your parents and sort of that generation, or my parents and that, like they still, I think, have this trust. It's kind of been grandfathered in, and they think, oh, of course, Channel 1 News, it's the news, right? But honestly, the bullshit is so thick. Like, the New Zealand Herald did some stuff on that Dasset, the issues with that, and just the amount of bullshit and the conflating it with the risk of Bitcoin, and and it's like, man, I expect more. I'm
sure about that article.
Yeah. Like, it's like, man,
that was a mess.
ChatGPT could have done a better job of summarizing this.
I read that article too, and I was just about screamed in frustration. I was just like, man, this is really unhelpful to your average person who doesn't understand any of this. Like, they don't, they just hear all these different buzzwords around crypto, and they just put it all together, and this is just this one entity, this one thing, and they just don't. Well, it just chopped and changed from different concepts and things to others, and just conflated it all together. And I was just like, this is right. They talked all about data, and then they gave a rundown of what private keys are. And I was like, this is ridiculous, because this DASIT was a non-custodial exchange. Like these, I could be wrong here.
It was custodial. So
DASIT have custody.
They had people's assets, yeah.
Yes. So people using that service do not have to have private keys in a situation like that. And yet half the article is explaining the concept of public and private keys and how that works. And yet the headline in the article is about DASIT, where that's not involved unless you withdraw, I guess.
Well, if you had withdrawn, you wouldn't have lost it.
Yeah. And so I was like, what? They're making out like this is... Oh, man. I got very frustrated reading that.
Yeah. No, it didn't really make sense. But I think the bigger idea here, which I was thinking about just the other day as well, you talk about China, for example, and, people are quick to criticize and say, well, China is undemocratic or blah, blah, blah. But people don't realize, China is a democracy. You vote for your village representatives, and then they vote for, the party, the local, kind of regional representatives. And, every Tom, Dick and his dog is a member of the Communist Party. And they are elected in that, regard. It's sort of... that side of democracy, which is kind of the superficial side of voting. And it's like the true, I think what we conflate with democracy, the ability to vote, what we actually associate with it is the ability to think outside the box and think outside of that system and entertain ideas beyond the party. And the problem I have with the current media political situation is, we've got David Seymour, we've got the Greens, we've got Te Pāti Maori, we've got the National, we've got all of these actors, next up, it's the ACT Party or whatever, but those are the options. And if you actually came in and said, well, I think we should just throw this whole system out and go with the Bitcoin standard, that's heresy, even in New Zealand. And you can't have that conversation. And so for me, it's like we're in the same boat as the Chinese. They can't talk about, a party other than the party. And we can't talk about a government other than the government. And so... I think
it's not far removed at all.
We need to get it. We're on a high horse, and what I like. We're free to have these conversations, so at least there's a bit of freedom there. But it's like in the mainstream, it's certainly not. We're not having a national discourse about this sort of the nature of our governance.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have because you try to talk with people about that sort of thing, and they think that you're promoting some kind of anti-democratic, like a fascism or a dictatorship situation or something. Most people can't even comprehend that maybe there's something else completely from all of this. And there's actually a book I just read, Knut Svanholm. He spoke about it in there, we speak of democracy in glowing terms because the reference was a feudal system before that, and so yes, it's a great leap forward because all of a sudden the people had a say in who's going to be. It's not hereditary anymore, and so from that contextual background, it's fantastic. But actually, what's next? Why do we assume that is you've reached some sort of pinnacle here? We didn't know that was possible until we found it and did it. So what's next? We don't know what's possible until we find it and do it. And there's as we believe as Bitcoiners, there's a better way to do it.
Was that everything divided by 21 million?
Yes. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. I think it was that one because I've now just gone straight into another book by him as well, but I'm pretty sure it was that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could remember the quote. I've probably highlighted it.
Yeah. No, I know what it's like. You can read a whole book and you got all of this sort of knowledge and this kind of network of this lattice of knowledge. But it's like who was the author and who are the characters and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how people remember that. So you've been talking about the sovereign individual a lot lately because you just read it, and now I'm actually jealous because I read it a year ago and I can't remember all the bits and pieces of it. And so you keep bringing up these great things, and I'm like, oh damn it! I wish you could just commit that thing to memory word for word.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it is a legacy power structure, and the media and the political system kind of feed into that. And something interesting I read somewhere, it was like, we're coming into an election in a couple of months, and you got polls, right, come out all the time. Who's leading, who's the most popular prime minister, and there's this thing that it's like the polls are not there to let you know what people think. They're there to tell you what to think. Because if you see that your favourite party is starting to lose, traction, and they can make these numbers up, you might think, oh, actually, maybe their vote's a waste. Maybe I'm going to put it somewhere else. And so, say you're after a minor party, and your party isn't going to look like it's going to hit the 5% mark. You're not going to waste your vote.
You're self-fulfilling prophecy.
It becomes self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that's why the news, the Colmar Brunton polls and that, they're all bullshit. You go and ask 20 people on the street in Wellington, New Zealand's going to be a green paradise with no cows and no sheep for the rest of the time. You go and ask 20 people in the countryside, and they'll say, Wellington will be underwater, and we'll be, we'll just be keeping on doing what we're doing.
I remember would have been around 2014 or 2017 election, and I was reading some poll stuff, and then I was researching online on how they do these polls, and hopefully it's changed now, but even then it was still largely landline based.
Who's got a landline, man?
I know, and at the time, I mean, it's even less now. I'm sure they must have changed the approach, but I was just laughing uncontrollably reading about this being landline based, and I thought, how can these polls be accurate? You've got a certain demographic of people still using landlines, so this is going to be massively skewed numbers if you're just ringing landlines. That's just crazy stuff. Another thing I always crack up about the polls is they'll bring out some polls, and then they'll hit up the politicians about what they think about the polls, and they'll straight away talk about their internal polling and how it's slightly different, so they're not worried about that. It's like, hang on, so you guys are running internal polling that you reckon is way better than this, and yet we don't get to see that. And it's for your purposes, and it's great. But you've obviously got some pretty efficient, awesome internal polling systems going on that's telling you better information than we're getting, and so you're dismissing the information that we're publicly getting.
Yeah, well, you know what they're doing, and the current Labour government is a representative of this, but they basically A/B testing everything. And so they have their people, that they go and talk to, and they're like, okay, so... And especially during the COVID era, if we did this, how would you feel if we did? But if we did this instead, this other thing, how would you feel? And that was what drove their entire response. And so
they just blow with the wind, and that is exactly what it is. And the best, most ridiculous example of that is the removal of GST from fruit and vegetables, because anyone with any interest in the financials in their party said all along that this is not something you should do. And now they've all flip-flopped, except for that one fella that's now going out of government because he was voiced as a thing. But there's nothing compelling about that policy except that they've done that polling type activity and thought that's going to give us a better chance to win the election. That is the single reason for that policy. And that's insane.
And if you want to know something dangerous, what I see, and so this is for real, what I see as a possible reality in my matrix of ideas here is that, every single politician on the table, out there at the moment is wishy-washy, flip-flop, no spine, right? That's just the way it is. And we can kind of bitch about that, but what actually gets problematic is when you then have a strong man come in who's got a vision for a country, because we've seen what that looks like before. And so in a way, they're kind of, they're blowing with the wind, and everyone's sort of on eggshells trying to be careful and saying the right thing. But then when the right person comes along, and they may be the wrong person in a sense, they're the strong man, that's when they say, all right, they sweep up the votes, and they sweep up the system, and then they reform the system to make sure that they can stay in. And that's when you enter into the fascist phase of democracy.
That's right.
That happens. China used to be a democracy too. And it doesn't... It's almost a reaction to no vision, no national vision, no direction, to have that sort of thing.
That is the cycle.
Yeah.
Yep. That is.
And I don't know. Like, could it happen in New Zealand? I don't know. I mean,
it could. If anyone was going to do it over the last 40 years, it would have been Winston. He was kind of that guy who sort of put himself in that position. He was heavily entrenched in the National Party and got out of that, and went on his own thing. And I think that's probably what he always potentially saw happening, but he never quite made it.
But even then, I mean, an everyman, sort of the folk hero, who could speak and has principles, and if people start latching on to that, then they can do no wrong. And I think in a way Jacinda had that appeal early on. She was the anointed one.
Did actually.
She had it, but the problem was that they were still wishy-washy, and so the kind of the appeal wasn't backed up by an actual vision and a pathway. But and as the economy starts to tank and we start losing things, the nice to have things start disappearing from the shelves, because this country's going bankrupt.
Yeah, that type of person you describe often has early success, which is what brings the trust to turn bad later and let it run. And yeah, I think a big part of what they do, those sort of brave, strong leaders, I guess, is they will put in a policy that's not popular but works. And so they'll do something and people won't like it, and then it'll work and people will like it. And your average politician is never going to put in a policy that's not popular, or is going to be actually, better phrase it, is too unpopular. And so they'll just not go down that path. But that's what we've seen with Trump. That's what Trump was. He was that guy who came in, and a whole portion of America were like, that's
never going to happen.
The system, we're sick of that system. This guy's saying the right things. He wants to do the right things. It's going to work. And they loved him. And then the system fought very hard to keep him down. They didn't always succeed, but they did a lot of the time. And they are right now, it seems.
Well, and I mean, the polls didn't predict that either. People were laughing about it.
Yeah, there you go. It was truly laughed at, and it was just because of that, the incorrect polling. Really, it was such a massive shock, and he won. That caused more division. But you're right. That was an attempt to come. he was the president for 4 years, but he didn't get to the point of corruption we've kind of described. But you've seen that in lots of places. Who was that guy? Venezuela, Chavez, was it? He came in and they loved him, and then he did all that stuff, and then he handed over to the next guy, and it's just fallen to crap. Even if they succeed, the success is built on this one individual. How do you hand that over? You can't. It's a path to destruction.
Yeah, it's I don't know, man. I think there's a lot we can learn from history here. And I think there's also a lived experience which is quite different. We're talking about stuff here that you walk down Lambton Quay and people look at you strange if you start talking about this kind of stuff. And, New Zealand is just the way it always was. Everything's going to be right. She'll be right, mate. And especially if you work for the government, it might seem like it's rosy from the inside. Maybe some of your contractors and people on the fringes are starting to lose their jobs, but for the people who are, full-time salaried employees for the government, life is good. Maybe your favorite cafe has shut down and that sort of thing, but you're not seeing the decay of the actual nation state of New Zealand, which I believe is taking place right now, and especially with the destruction of the rural sector with some of this emissions trading stuff, and kind of he waka eke noa, and basically saying, we're going to make it impossible to farm beef and dairy and make it difficult for agriculture. Like, New Zealand was built on the back of cows and sheep.
It does frustrate me.
And it's like, what are we going to do? We're going to suddenly make silicon transistors and integrated circuits or something. Like, where's the infrastructure for building anything?
I saw some data about we're really good on scales of our farming have less impact on our environment in other countries. We're in one of the top countries for this stuff, and yet we're still pressing away at this. And I wonder, again, it's all, the ideas are great, but the execution is going to be awful for so many. And what I'd love to see is some benefits analysis. Like, what is all of this going to have? What is making farmers' lives difficult going? What is going to be the net positive impact on our environment. And so I like the waterways argument. You know, I'm really quite passionate about work to ensure our waterways are in a good state, because they've deteriorated badly and there is issues there. But man, if we're imposing massive regulation to stop cows farting, etc., you know, what is going to be the measurable benefit on the world's climate from New Zealand doing that? It's virtually nothing. And so I just worry about all this stuff. You know, you have to make sure people's well-being is okay first, and then do these things.
Well, that's
again, I'm not an expert in this area. I don't want to speak out of turn.
No. I mean, look, it's I'm reminded of Viktor Frankl. He said, you know, if you've got a why, you can put up with almost any how. And I think that's sort of the question, right? Why? What is the vision for us here, more broadly? You know, these islands of New Zealand. You know, what is this country? I don't think that's a conversation that anyone's really looking at, because everything I see in the media is around breaking it up and destroying any sense of identity. And you know, I used to kind of, you know, feel like I was part of a country, but certainly at the moment I think, fuck you guys, like I'm doing my own thing with the Bitcoin crew. I have friends all over the world. I speak a couple of languages, and I'm privileged to be in that position, but you know, especially what's happened over the last few years, and some of the just outrageous policies, and the representation of what I you know, I grew up in the countryside. What I think New Zealand is, and what, you know, I'm being told it is two different things. It's like we're at war. Are we at war with Eurasia or East Asia? I don't know.
Get that feeling with the current,
you know, like
stuff. Eh?
And that's where, I mean, maybe we, you know, the right person emerges who's just a wholesome, you know, down to earth person who's like, look, guys, we got some work to do. Let's knuckle down.
I feel like the right person is all the Bitcoiners.
Yeah. Well, the stuff you're saying makes me sound like, man, I'd vote for you, Paul.
Bitcoin is the groundswell from underneath. Excuse the pun, I'm not trying to relate back to the farmers' plight, but man, I feel like the best thing to do is to study Bitcoin, build things in Bitcoin, develop the Bitcoin circular economy, and watch it fly, and the rest of New Zealand will come into it. And, you know, I feel like we'll preserve a great country through that coming up from the bottom.
Yeah, man, because that's the thing. At the end of the, I mean, some of my other, you know, my talk with Darcy and that, you know, it may come across, and even stuff I've said today may come across like, you know, I'm not interested in New Zealand, but certainly if there's a way where there's, you know, we could, you know, bring back, you know, this kind of golden childhood of mine where it's sort of ice cream on a Sunday, go down to the beach, you know, life is good. You know, there's no color, race, or creed. We are just, you know, these southern islands. I mean, that's a beautiful place. Which if we could get back to that, it'd be great. I don't know. Things never seem to go back the way they were.
I was just going to say, we can get something like that. That's new and different. You know, was that? Someone said a great saying, or I read a great saying, and I'm so bad for not being able to quote properly and then forgetting who said it. But something about you can never swim in the same river twice. Because you're
Heraclitus.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because you're a different man and it's a different river.
Yeah,
something like that. And I was like, man, that's good. I love that.
Yeah, that's Heraclitus, ancient philosopher, one of the ancients who passed on much wisdom to us. But hey, Paul, I appreciate this. This is really a bit of banter today.
It's been good.
Yeah, so I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll catch up again soon.
Yeah, we'll have to catch up again soon. I'll come on again soon and talk about the upcoming Bitkiwi events. Yeah. We've got some more planning. We've got 2 months away from our next one in Auckland, and then Queenstown in February, which is going to be quite exciting. We're getting into a bit of planning with that too.
What are your dates, just in case?
So we're 28th of October, Auckland, 2 p.m. At the moment, our venue is Brothers Beer, Mount Eden. We're working on a plan B venue.
So they've been a victim of the government's financial mismanagement, or is it their own accord?
I can't speculate on the details, but Brothers, they've been very accommodating for having our event. Okay. We love Brothers Beer.
Okay, we love
I have just read in the news that their company's gone into liquidation. They have a number of venues, and this particular venue is still open and remaining open.
I see.
But we will create a backup plan because we don't quite know. But all things going well in their liquidation, they carry on. But what will not change is the date and the time, October 28th, 2 p.m, definitely in Auckland. We'll confirm as soon as there is, if there's any change. And then Bitkiwi 8 will be February 17th, 2024 in Queenstown, and that'll be 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. We have just confirmed the venue is Yonder, and we've also locked in a couple of speakers we'll talk about later, and we're working on some other details around it, so getting pretty excited about that. We're going to organise probably something the day before and the day after, make it a bit of a weekend thing, bit of a Bitcoiners pilgrimage to Queenstown, which should be super fun. So yeah, that's on the horizon, and we've started tentatively mapping out Bitkiwis 9 and 10 for next year as well. So might have, gosh, I don't know how much I should say actually, but we're talking about potentially Bitkiwi halving party, April 2024.
Okay.
Could be on the cards, so we'll make announcements as we start to plan things.
Well, thank you, man. All right, much appreciated.
Cheers, Cody. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Ellingham, and that was The Transformation of Value. If you'd like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.